Does California currently have a plan in place that's now being modified, or are you still working to devise the first comprehensive
Well,
plan?
there is an existing plan that was developed under the Davis administration, and then when we had Schwarzenegger came in, they I shouldn't say they're working with it. I think they are using the plan, but a lot of it's not being implemented. And we're looking at the old plan. We're developing new ideas and coming up with a good infrastructure. I think the benefit of now and even under the Davis administration is we have the buy-in from the Health and Human Service Secretary. Kim Belshea is at the meeting. She's engaged. She's very involved. She's very straightforward with us and bringing our feedback to the governor, which is extremely helpful. And I feel like we are being heard and we're moving in a direction. Hopefully this won't go on for years and years, that we'll develop a plan. And it will change as time changes and the environment changes, but we're looking at a methodology to help folks with disabilities, including seniors, live in the community or where they choose to live, and typically that's in the community.
If I could throw in there and pick up on Nancy's remarks in the earlier segment that part of advocacy is legal advocacy. And the Olmstead decision does allow where a plan for shifting resources and services more to home and community-based services, if the plan is not moving along at enough of a rate to really see that shift happening, advocates, people with disabilities, other people do have that leverage of pointing out that there is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says people with disabilities have a constitutional right to live in the community when a health professional says they can live there. So it's a leverage and a little bit of can be a kick in the butt sometimes for policymakers and other folks who might be dragging their feet in implementing.
That's an excellent point. In fact, I assume the Olmstead decision itself was a product of legal advocacy. So.
Yeah, the decision itself was in Georgia. Tommy Olmstead, who was the Health and Human Service Secretary for the state of Georgia, was refusing to allow two women to live in the community. They were stuck in a nursing home. And some advocates got behind them and took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's ironic that it's named the Olmstead decision, since he was kind of opposed to this whole concept.
Right. And now his name is inextricably linked to...
Which I think is kind of fun.
Right. It sounds like, to follow up on something Nancy said about sort of group advocacy, you have perhaps a legal framework in place, but now you have to actually, as Donna kind of pointed out, you have to sort of push to make sure that your constitutional rights are actually vindicated, in a sense, and that the so-called, a right is not much of a right if it exists on paper, and there's not much follow-through, either budget-wise or, as you say, as the officials just refuse to acknowledge that independent living is an important, policy goal.
And that's where I think the advocacy for IHSS has been so crucial the past couple of years, because I think it was pointed out earlier that the Governor Schwarzenegger, for the past couple of years, really proposed some very dramatic cuts to the In-Home Supportive Services program, because it is such a big program. It serves over 350,000 people on any given day around the state.
Donna, we were talking about the Olmstead decision on kind of a statewide level, but I'm curious if individual county public authorities are required to implement a written plan to allow people with disabilities to live in the community.
There's no specific requirement for a written plan. I think Nancy referred earlier to the fact, though, that there is a role for either the governing boards, if they are independent for the public authorities, or the advisory committees to make suggestions for improvements to the in-home supportive services program locally to their board of supervisors, to the department that oversees IHSS, and to the public authority if there are ways the public authority's work could be improved. So there is that role locally. I would say my experience here in San Francisco, we were one of the first public authorities formed, so we've been around a little longer than others, and our advocacy at first was even explaining what the public authority is and getting it established. And as it's become more scattered around the state, then in a certain respect our advocacy has been more at the state level with these dramatic cuts proposed and so on.
Well, I'm curious about, Tony, for example, what would you say is one of the greater obstacles facing implementation of plans? Is it the public still not, is there a public perception that nursing homes are superior, There's simply larger public doesn't know about it. There's just not enough funding. I mean, I guess there's probably a
Yeah,
variety.
I don't think we have to worry about that. I don't think the public is really in favor of nursing homes. Most people don't really want to go there. I mean, it's really the last resort. They've kind of set it up to that's the way the perception is. I think the bigger problem is that there's a lot of turf issues. People have their pot of money, they have their situation, and it's hard for them to let go to see that maybe if I change the way I'm thinking, I could enhance Olmsted by doing this kind of creative program. Maybe a nursing home could become a homeless shelter or a board and care of some sort, where people have more choices to come and go. The other issue is I think it's there are a lot of silos. Money goes in this pot, and you can't move it over to this pot. And that's what we need to look at, is how to expand the money that we already have, because we're not going to have a big influx of new money. We really have got to figure out ways to better use the existing resources. And the other thing, lastly, is probably many things, but the other is people's thinking. It's really hard for some folks to kind of think differently and realize that somebody with a disability, a significant disability, like Nancy, for instance, can live in the community to make her own choices, can hire and fire her workers, can go to a great job that's very fulfilling for her, that's bringing income. They don't see that, and we have to change that perception of society.
And also, there are folks with significant disabilities that have successfully lived in the community with personal care assistance for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so we have a history that it is possible to do that. And to build on what Tony said, I think funding for really implementing the Olmsted Act is really the major issue. And like you said, sort of the turf issues. But when you ask somebody if they want to go to a nursing home, nobody does. So it's never the place of choice. People want to be in their own homes, and they want to be able to live a life that they choose.
Well, thank you for joining us for this segment of the Better Care Forum. Please stay with us for a further discussion of these important issues. And I think one thing. Welcome back to the Better Care Forum with our guests Donna, Tony, and Nancy. And we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the ongoing challenges to the possibility of people with disabilities living independently. And I think we talked about funding, obviously, is an important need. Are there some other challenges that people need to be aware of that we can all work on toward making it more possible for people to live independently?
Well, I think first of all, we have to change the perception away from institutionalization. That's what people know about, and people don't necessarily know that people with significant disabilities can live and are living in the community. If somebody were to look at me, they would have no idea, first of all, how I live, but they would be surprised to find that I'm trying to live a life of my own choosing and being able to try to have a good quality of life, and also trying to participate and be integrated into the community. So I think that's one of the challenges that needs to be expanded.
Donna, what are some of the ongoing challenges faced by the San Francisco Public Authority? I know you probably have to wrestle with these things every day. I'm curious as to sort of how you guys see the future and what needs to be addressed most urgently.
Well, to be honest, I think the San Francisco Public Authority has, since we've kind of gained credibility and respectability, and people know we're not going to be wild-eyed in our approach to the improvements we suggested, we have a lot of credibility and there's a lot of support locally. So I don't mean to say there aren't any advocacy challenges in San Francisco, but the ones we have are more related to larger issues, such as Nancy and Tony have referred to, that penetrating the barrier of people understanding what home care and personal assistance services are is just an ongoing education. I also find that a lot of people, I know that I myself have had my consciousness raised enormously about people with disabilities wanting to retain their autonomy and consumer choice.
Sure.
Our society tends to be top down and kind of bureaucratic in approach. And so I think some of the challenges helping people understand that if you provide adequate support services in the community, the consumer can make the choice of what their quality is. You don't need highly regulated arenas. I mean, we've referred to nursing facilities. They're highly regulated. That has not led to a high level of care. So I think some of what people have to understand, and what, for me, we're trying to show with IHSS and the public authorities, is that a fairly unregulated arena of providing services to people works for most people who still are able to hire and supervise their own workers.
What can, let's say a member of our audience, what can people do themselves, tying back a little bit into the advocacy, but what can people do themselves to educate others around them to the possibilities that I think a lot of people just don't realize exist?
Well, I think people with disabilities being in the community, being out on the streets, being working at a job, going to a restaurant, spending their money in the community is really a big thing to promote disability awareness. And as somebody running a public authority, I think the biggest thing I can do is help consumers find their voice and help them refine their voice so they can speak up. I do think the counties where the In-Home Supportive Services works better is where they listen to the consumers, where they have involved consumers on their advisory boards, on their governing boards, giving feedback, listening to them, and helping move the program to the direction that helps consumers get what they need, which is better in-home services.
Do you see a change in people's perceptions over the years toward the model that that's being advocated? Or, I mean, I'm sure there's still work to be done, but as compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, have you begun to see a shift in attitudes toward the need for people to be able to live independently?
Well, certainly we see more people with disabilities and elderly people out in the community, whether they're just wheeling down the road or in a restaurant, and that's something different that we didn't see years ago. But we really, to continue this voice of disability and what is possible, we need to really make sure that some of our younger folks are having an opportunity to live in the community, to get an education, because as we get older, there needs to be the next generation that continues this effort toward people being able to live in the community. And I think if there's a person who suddenly has a disabled member in their family, maybe they had a stroke, their parent or spouse had a stroke or a heart problem, it's difficult to get information right away, to be able to sort out what's possible and what's out there. And certainly the public authorities and is one avenue by which you can begin to at least get some information, as well as independent living centers.
I think there are encouraging signs on the federal level, even though that it's not always for the reasons that I would like, and it's not always funded to the level that I think is really required. But the current administration is definitely looking at the public authority model and models where it's called self-direction or consumer-driven assistance. And those are all recognitions that this type of service is
One of the
making it.
themes is empowerment, and of course, that follows naturally that people with disabilities should be empowered just as everyone else is. Well, thank you for joining us for this evening's Better Care Forum discussion of advocacy and action. We're looking forward to having you with us in the future episodes as the Better Care Forum explores further strategies for success.